Hey, welcome to the Manhwa recap. Today we are going to cover the series I Picked a Hammer to Save the World. Hope you enjoy and stand by. The story is about a hero named Tiny was on the verge of death after defeating the commander of the 7th Corps of the Demon King's army. But in that situation, destruction of mankind cannot be prevented, so the last surviving comrade Sword Emperor used his power to send Tiny back in the past. From being the strongest knight on the continent, Tiny resurrects in the slums as an orphan and gains new powers he didn't have in the previous life. Will he be able to save the human life from extinction this time? Once upon a time, the world was doomed with demon armies and monsters killing humans however they wanted and whenever they wanted. They were trying to execute each and every human living in the world so they can rule over the world. But to protect the mankind from the grasp of the demons and monsters, 10 of the strongest knights who used to guard the continent have been through hell and back. All of them wasted their full life force and mana to protect the innocents from the monsters of the underworld. The continent is now just a vast stretch of contaminated land where only death lingers. Millions of bodies can be seen laying down on the surface of the earth, and all of these was caused by a single entity. Demon Commander Gluttony is behind all these inhuman killings of countless humans on the battlefield, which makes Tiny, the strongest knight of the continent, furious. It is exhausting how a single entity was causing the death of millions of innocent humans. When Tiny and the Demon Commander come face to face, he admits the strength of Tiny being overwhelming, but he will not be an easy to kill demon for him. It will be far from easy to take the life of Gluttony. The words uttering from the mouth of Gluttony makes Tiny angrier than ever, and he wields his hammer-like weapon above his head while jumping to hit the Demon Commander. The lightning wallop hit the hand of the Demon Commander, and at first, he thought nothing was going to happen to him. He mocked Tiny for his efforts and called them futile. Furious, Tiny went ahead, overpowering his hit as a meteor objurgation, which ended up finishing him off, slicing in half. The peace finally came with the cost of countless lives, and it leaves Tiny on the verge of death. He was finally out of mana, and he wonders if everything was wrong from the very beginning. He questions his own conscience if he has done any mistakes that took him to his extent. Mana training was considered to be the exclusive knowledge of distinguished knights and nobility. For that reason, Tiny had to overcome countless failures while advancing slower than everyone else around him. He went up to the top from the very bottom of the knights. He believed in himself that he can overcome complex challenges. But now he is questioning in his own techniques and methods. He wonders if he was right making choices and choosing paths. Maybe he could have saved everyone on the continent if only he was choosing right path from the start. Tiny has defeated only the 7th out of all the commanders, and he was truly something else. If the 7th out of all the commanders wields that much power, then just how powerful are the other commanders and the Demon King? Tiny wonders. All of a sudden, Tiny sees the Sword Emperor, Asgard von Valentia, slowly dying just 2 or 3 feet away from him. But before he dies, he wanted to ask Tiny why he didn't run away from the battle. He knew that Tiny was a child from the slums, and it must have been pretty hard for him to come this far. Tiny says that a man should be confident, and he would never run for the love of God. Sword Emperor laughs after listening to his answers and praises Tiny's talent, since he is one of the 10 strongest knights of the continent. Tiny feels like he is dying all of a sudden, and before it happens, the Sword Emperor reveals the name of his daughter being Lila and tells him to come find him. Tiny wakes up in a familiar room from his childhood beside his sister's dead body. She died protecting his younger brother after a ring goes missing because of him. The thugs barged into the room and kicked the chair, which dropped his sister's dead body on the ground. They wanted to sell her body to some sick dudes or harvest the organs to make money off of her dead body. Tiny gets furious, and suddenly some kind of mana flows through his hands. He protects his dead sister's body from the thugs and realizes that he is really in the past to change the future. He cries while shouting, only if the Sword Emperor had sent him back just a little bit further, he would have been able to save his sister. He considers this chance to let his sister rest in peace. He remembers that he has to reach the Sword Emperor after taking his revenge on the man named Wolf who killed his sister. In his past life, Tiny barely killed him by snapping his spine, but he wants to take a proper revenge this time. He and his sister weren't connected by blood, and all they had in common were black eyes and hair. His sister Erina was the only person that cared for him and didn't avoid him like the rest. She said Tiny reminded her of her own lost brother. She was the one who gave him the name and treated him with care and love. This time he gives a proper burial to his sister. Emma, who was a friend of Erina, feels like something inside Tiny has changed after the death of her friend. His wounds didn't take much time to heal after getting bruised by the thugs before and carried his dead sister's corpse on his back. He reminds himself that he shouldn't blame himself or be discouraged, and Erina always told him to keep his head high. 1 month later, he reaches the place where Wolf and his thugs were residing to take his revenge. He smashes the thugs one by one who came in front of him to stop him. His body of mana and the physical body fused together, which made him more powerful, but to reach that he had to eat 10 times more than a normal person. Each one of the thugs underestimated his small body of a kid and having no weapon with him alone, which made the confrontation easier for Tiny. Only the Randers brothers were left after some time fighting with the thugs inside the camp. He challenges the Randers brothers to come down to fight with him, and they realize that Tiny is a mana user. Tiny remembers himself in the past life using bodies of people as a weapon, but his combat master taught him to do hand-to-hand combat instead. Tiny sees through the movements of Randers brothers and dodged from their attack while leaving a strong punch. He destroyed the bits of both the brothers and moved on to take his revenge on the ruler of the invaders. Tiny remembers that he was surprised in his previous life after knowing that aside from being a pimp, Wolf belonged to the Beastman tribe, which was considered the best among the demi-human races, and among them the pure silver werewolf was special. Since Wolf was special, he was so hard to kill in his previous life. Wolf gets furious after seeing a mere kid smashing through his thugs reaching for his life and wanted to rip Tiny's mouth. Tiny mocks Wolf after seeing that he doesn't have silver fur on him and called him a puppy. Tiny realizes that something has changed, and this isn't the Wolf that he fought in his previous life, which makes him more furious. Tiny beats him up until Wolf comes to his senses and become a human again. When Wolf dropped on the ground, something fell out of his mouth which looked like a stone. He starts begging for his life of his sister so Tiny doesn't kill him. Tiny asks Wolf what a beastman like him is doing in a place like this and notices the stone on the floor. After touching the stroney, he realizes that it is actually a demonic QL, and suddenly a demonic wolf-like creature arises from the stone. In his previous life, Tiny was introduced to spiritual creatures by one of his female companions named Estina from the night ranks. He didn't know that there was a spiritual creature living outside El Benem and heard that animal spirits are rare. She also told him that the quintessence of a spirit is spirit stone. The werewolf had a spirit stone with him which was precious, but it was in a weird state since it was emanating a demonic QL that is usually present in spirit stone of demons. Tiny released the demonic chains that kept the creature chained, which released the memories of the silver wolf creature. In the memories, Tiny sees that invaders with demonic aura creating beastmen by making people absorb the spirit stone. That's how the leader of the invaders became the wolf guy. Since Tiny arrived sooner in this life, he couldn't absorb it completely. Tiny is able to control the spirit even though he has no knowledge of spirit taming. But in his previous life, Estina told that if someone has a pure soul and enough mana, the person could control a spirit. Young children can do that as well since they have pure soul. It is revealed that Tiny's mana recovered the cracks on spirit stone, and that's how he is now able to connect with it. Most spirits grow stronger and tight with the increase in the tamer's strength, and this was the reason why Estina was one of the best among the 10 knights. Tiny named the silver wolf Lunar Wolf, and it woke up the invader leader from the out-of-mind state. The leader told them that the demon worshippers are from an organization and revealed that he was only a test subject. But he couldn't reveal any crucial information about them since the organization had planted an enchantment on his mouth. He died miserably. The same kind of incident happened in Tiny's previous life, but that time he had no idea of him being a beastman. Tiny broke the wall and the treasure chest behind it, which exposed all the gold and treasures. He knew he had to make his future ally Sword Emperor to trust him, so he had to take the Valentina family's ring with him. In his previous life, Chloe Van Valentina, the youngest daughter of the Sword Emperor, was kind enough to give her ring to him. So, he could later look for her with that ring and get help. Everyone living in the Aslan Empire knew her. She was named the Angel of Valentina for her kindness. She met Tiny while it was time for her to lay flowers in each temple to make her name known due to the tradition. Lamb, the File's outer castle commander of guards, came looking for Tiny since he made a ruckus. He was looking for a way to up his bribe with this excuse from the invader leader. The knight became furious after Tiny made fun of him, which made him attack Tiny. But since Tiny is low in mana power because of his age, he doesn't want to make the estate lord his enemy just yet, and the troops they had are too many for him to cover. After taking a look at the spirit wolf, Lamb was frustrated, but it all went down peacefully when Tiny introduced bribe in the conversation. Tiny then, as a new owner, paid the knight extra to greet the estate lord while asking for a schedule to the knight. But before leaving the scene, the knight reminded Tiny to pay him in time if he doesn't want to see the wrath of the estate lord. But on the inside, Tiny was planning something greater that was way beyond the knight's knowledge. The gang of the previous leader who ratted the knight about Tiny was forced to bring anyone who worked in the invader in 1 hour. Everyone in the invader was scared after seeing the corpse of Wolf since he was backed by the estate lord himself. But Tiny knew something about the estate lord of Files that could blow out of proportion, which he could use as a leverage. The outer castle commander Lam was under probation of the whole incident that happened in Invader. All single shops and stores were closed after the rise of Tiny, as the new Invader boss and the Lord weren't making any money. The Lord of Files called in Tiny for a private interview. With the knowledge Tiny gained from his past life and experience, he knew that the account book is the quickest way to finish off the estate lord and his lunacy. Everyone living in the Invader were given the permission to take revenge on Wolf and take away his money and treasure to move in Diane. Emma told Tiny to come find her afterwards in Diane if it's too hard for him someday, and he thanked her for the gratitude. By Tiny's actions, the red light district of Files, Invader, was closed permanently. The arrival of Tiny and his attitude inside the palace of Estate Lord angered Kron, the Grand Master of Files' Night Order. He wanted to finish Tiny off with the permission of Estate Lord. By entering the chamber of Estate Lord, Tiny was shocked by the appearance of him. Tiny's knowledge about etiquette surprised him in a great way. Jim in Volume Files Baron, the Estate Lord was fat and heavily drug addicted when Tiny met him. Regardless of him being a noble, Tiny was dedicated in supplying the account book to Duke of Valentina. Tiny flattered the Estate Lord by wanting to be one of his servants, but he wasn't happy since he lost his money for him. He was also concerned by the age of Tiny, since no 13 years old could think of doing what he has done. But Tiny rounds up facts to keep the situation in his favor, saying he saved the Estate Lord from the crackdown of the Duke of Valentina on drugs and prostitution. The Estate Lord praised Tiny for his methods despite it being rough, since it helped him in the long run. He then questions Tiny about the spirit of a wolf that he now controls that was stolen from Wolf's spirit stone while being furious at him. It was revealed by the power of Lunar Wolf Spirit that there was a circle around the Estate Lord made of demonic energy, and he is a dark magician. He was the one purchasing the corpses from Invader from the dark. Estate Lord Baron clarified Tiny's mana and skills with the help of Khan, which will soon reach level 2. When he asked to Tiny where he learned his techniques, he avoided it by saying it was inherited from his parents, since nobody would believe him now if he said he is the one who developed that. Tiny thought that he won the conversation, since it would have been impossible to track his records, but Emperor Lord's guest was coming to verify, which made Tiny slightly scared. It looked more like he was in the organization that Wolf mentioned. Everything would go according to Tiny's plan if the guest arrived after 15 days, but it turned out bad for him, since he will arrive in a week, which made him more irritated and frustrated at the same time. Duke's men usually take total of 15 days to commence the arrest or punishment. The sudden announcement leaves Tiny with only 2 options. The first one is fleeing from the palace, which will make him a wanted man, which will create problems when he tries meeting the Sword Emperor. Second option is making a ruckus in Files, which will have everyone's focus in this place. There will be a great chance of the visit being cancelled or postponed. Meanwhile, he has to train enough to gain enough strength to defeat the Grand Master and the Lord. To train, Tiny has to burn more food than everyone else, so he eats more than anyone he knows. The more he eats, the stronger he becomes, and that will of eating scared everyone inside the palace. A knight named Grant came annoying Tiny while he was eating, which ended up causing a duel between him and Tiny. The Grand Master was supporting the knight and encouraging him into fighting Tiny, even though one of the other knights wanted him to not cause any trouble. In the duel, Grant and Tiny both refused to use any lethal weapons since they didn't feel the urgency. By underestimating the strength of Tiny, Knight Grant made a grave mistake on his behalf. Tiny broke both of his legs in the fight, which caused him a great pain, but he was still resilient. The willpower of Grant was not useful in the particular fight, since Tiny was one of the greatest knights in the whole continent. His techniques were way out of Grant's grasp. Tiny jumped on his back and grabbed his head, which ended up with Grant being unconscious. Everyone around the fighting pit was astonished, since the knight was defeated by a mere child even without the help of Lunar Wolf. The whole event made Tiny more confident. After the fight with Grant ended, the crowd was shocked, and Tiny himself realized that he overdid himself in the whole event. Exposing himself and his abilities in a hostile area like that is only going to end up costing him more in the long run. But he had no choice but to do it, since the level between the both of them were huge. It was either him or Grant in that fight. Tiny had to pour out almost his whole mana, while Grant was too angry to even care about it. When he was off guard, Tiny used that moment to create a chance of winning over the fight. Tiny realizes that even though it is easier in this new life, but if this was in the previous one, he would have had to put much more effort. The mana body in his previous life had a great difference compared to this new life. Even though he could recover physically quite quickly, but the mana recovery was extremely slow compared to the others. Since he was gained another chance in life, he can now overcome the disadvantage with his completely integrated mana this time. For that reason, he can do much harsh training easier than ever, and it can help him get much stronger than he was in his previous life. Estate Lord Baron apologized to Tiny for the misunderstanding between him and Tiny, which was gladly accepted by Tiny. The next day, He invited Tiny to dinner so they could enjoy the steak together as the beginning of a new relationship. Tiny misunderstood the lunch being the breakfast, as he doesn't really feel like he ate anything in the morning. Baron could somehow understand that the destructive power Tiny used to defeat the knight came out of that appetite of his. But Tiny avoided the talk by saying it all happened because the knight let his guard down in the fight. Baron noticed his modesty in the conversation and looked forward to his future very much. Baron says that is a shame that there is no teacher to mentor a genius like Tiny, and Tiny answered the question, making it real philosophical in the end. Which made Baron question about his history knowledge and table manners. He wonders that Tiny might be a noble even though he has black hair and eyes, but in reality, Tiny learned it all in his previous life. Baron then starts talking about a place by calling it that place, which he doesn't explain any further, which confuses the hell out of Tiny. He also talks about someone mysterious and adds that the person will explain the details when he arrives, which makes him more sound like a drug addict to Tiny. But the mana circle around the Baron kept him still fine and active. Tiny cannot be sure when the demon may take it back from him, since in the previous life, it seemed like he was abandoned by the mysterious figure during the war, and that is how he lost his mana circle. Baron includes that Tiny should look forward to meet him because he is incredible as a person who will give him an important post. Tiny appreciates his ideas and thanks him for his soul gratitude. Tiny keeps training on his body and mind while worrying about the mysterious man and his organization at the same time. But there was no need to dig it up right now because he was going to be prepared at the time. He compares the levels of Baron and Khan with his level of previous life, since he has to go way above in this life. He targets the next 6 days for his hardcore training to perform way better than them. 3 days later, even though Tiny's body was small, he has become much stronger than before when he arrived inside the manor. His movements are now more fluent and realized that the big-sized body of his previous life could have been the issue that held him back. In the hope of being big and strong, the harmony between the mana body and physical body was broken, which caused the most trouble. It proves that being big doesn't always mean that you will be strong. Whenever the other knights saw Tiny around the pit, they avoided him like he was some kind of demon that came from hell. Everyone around him lost interest in him, since Tiny can only be seen eating or training each and every time. Grandmaster Khan tells Tiny to follow him and revealed that the estate leader has ordered him to arm himself. Khan tells Tiny to be grateful since the Baron holds him in such a high place. After checking out the armory, Tiny doesn't feel like any of the armors or weapons are fit for him and asks the Grandmaster if he can get something similar to his sword. Grandmaster Khan reveals that his sword is nothing ordinary, since it was built from a luxurious artifact Gruas, and it was made by Rogers, the master of sword. Khan also says that it is out of Tiny's league, which makes him say that the sword suits him even more. It angers the hell out of Grandmaster, and Tiny adds more fuel to the furiousness by telling him to engage in a battle with him to decide who is the better knight. Tiny says that if he loses the fight, he will offer his life in the end. The Grandmaster gets more mad and ends up getting his sword above to hit Tiny. In the next scene, it can be seen that Tiny is apologizing to the Grandmaster inside the armory where they both were in the previous scene. He gets out from the army with the huge sword of Grandmaster Khan in his hands, and it makes the guards gossip about it for a while. They even talk about the rumors that people were talking about Tiny and his abilities. They heard that the Grandmaster didn't like people talking about things like Tiny being the next leader and some other things. Even though they felt sorry for Tiny being in that hurt state where he cannot even walk properly. But they felt like they shouldn't involve in the matter since it can go against them. The maids of the manor were really worried about Tiny being hurt, so they asked him how it happened to him. He then explained that the Grandmaster wanted to give him something, but something happened between the two of them which caused such thing. They felt real sorry for Tiny and told him to go rest so he can recover his injuries. At night, Baron asks his butler asking what happened to the sacrifice, which he replies it by saying that it is already secured. When Baron asks if there were corpses of Wolfgang again, the butler replies in positive. The answer freezes up Baron for a second because he knows Tiny is the one who made that specific mess. The Baron is confused since he doesn't know anything about Tiny and what he can do in future. But he doesn't want to make his life any harder since the Wolfgang incident didn't really damage him that much in that sense. All he can do is wait for his helper to arrive so they can both confirm Tiny's bloodline for good. That alone will open his path to success for the future. But there is a problem since Tiny isn't from the family which the Baron was expecting him to be. If that is the case, everyone will pay for the whole thing happening. Even though, Baron thinks that it will not come to that considering the acts and talks along with the knowledge of the past that Tiny possesses. The whole behavior and attitude alone make it look like Tiny belonged to a prestigious family. Besides, it is quite impossible for a kid to beat a knight with just mere talent. It only makes sense if Tiny learned that from the family's secret technique. Not only that, but also the black hair and eyes make him even more special. It seems that the Baron was going to use Tiny to prove something, and that thing will help him greatly in the long run. With the excitement of meeting his helper, the Baron tries sleeping, but he gets a magic alert which annoys the hell out of him. Just after he was annoyed as hell and tried to ignore it, Tiny came running with the sword that he claimed from the Grand Master and stabbed the Baron inside out with it. The stabbing took away the life out of him, and in the next morning he was found by the housemaid of the manor. The knight of the manor was in shock to find out that the Baron was indeed a black magician. After a priest inspecting the scene, it was confirmed that the Baron was surely a black magician. The priest detected the traces of demonic energy, and they have already gone to report this incident to the church. Not only that, but also the investigators from the royal palace will arrive at the manor for their own confirmation. It was revealed that the body of black magicians rots right away after their death, and that is the reason why the Baron's body was looking like he died weeks ago. All the knights shamed the Baron's actions of transforming himself into a black magician. They were ashamed why someone will abandon their own bloodline of being a noble and choose a life that would get him killed when discovered. Files Knight Gren felt like it will only waste the time if they kept debating in front of the dead body. Also, there was another problem in the whole incident, which was the Grandmaster's sword. Nobody wanted to believe that Grandmaster Khan could do something like that in any state. Some of the knights felt like Baron argued with the Grandmaster about the matter of Tiny being the new Grandmaster, which angered him. Since Khan was a hot-headed person, it was only normal for him to cause something like that. But some of the knights didn't agree with the matter being that reason alone. It could only happen if the Grandmaster had gone mad fully. The fact that the Grandmaster himself wasn't showing up on his duty made it more weird and making it look like he was the one who did it. Knights of the manor got uneasy with each moment's passing, since they had no clues of what was actually happening in the manor. They decided to investigate the matter a little, so they started asking everyone in the manor along with all the maids and guards. They all have provided evidence saying that the Grandmaster had beaten Tiny, which made Khan look like the one who can be blamed. After asking everyone around the manor, there was only one person left who could give the incident a conclusion. That person was Tiny himself, since he was the last person that met Grandmaster Khan the last time. The knights met with Tiny, and he responded it by saying that he met with the Grandmaster yesterday because he was supposed to get him an armor suit, but he was brutally beaten by him instead of getting an armor. But the knight gets mad at Tiny since the storage was already investigated, and even though there were traces, but the Grandmaster certainly left that place. Nobody in the castle noticed Grandmaster Khan, and he got vanished just after meeting Tiny, which makes him wonder if Tiny never seen the Grandmaster after or not. Thanks for watching.